Okay, in the last video we went into the usage of sky elements and bringing them together in a nice seamless fashion. We covered the different cloud effects going around other types of sky imagery. Here's the sky imagery in a reflection kind of formatting. And this is the Lakeside Cove again. What different types of water elements are really fun thing to use when you're kind of focusing your scenes around the sky images, because you can do them in two different places as if they were a reflection. Anyway, I'll get into different types of inking techniques in a separate video, but I thought I'd kind of touch on it, a little bit here in this video because we just finished doing this one in video number 3. There's a lot of different techniques that you can use when using landscape stamps. If I was doing this on a matte cardstock, this one happens to be on glossy cardstock, but if I was doing it on matte, I can use something like chalks or colored pencils, something that required a little bit more tooth than, say, a real slick glossy cardstock. The glossy cardstock tends to have a different type of look in the end results because it is sealed off and has that glossy sheen. The dye bastings that I like to use sit really nicely on top of that cardstock. It's the same, glossy cardstock is basically the same cardstock that professional printers use to print postcards on. So it's a little bit different than, say, something like a photo paper. A lot of people ask me if they can use photo paper, something that you would run through an inkjet machine. But, the thing is that there's so many different inks out there, you just gotta kind of give it a shot. That's my best advice, and test it out and see if it works for you, if that's what you have. Anyways, going back to these are dye-based inks. I have this selection of them in a range of blue tones, and that's really important when you're going to be layering on colors in this kind of fashion here. You don't have to use a certain amount of them. I'm going to be using this is called Seashells Ocean Aqua. Now it's called Aqua, and the new name for the set is called Adirondack Lights. These happen to be a shadow stamping ink. They're really light inks, and that's where the shadow stamping aspect of them comes into play. But I don't really use them for that. I use them to as my initial tone when I'm starting to color these scenes. All right, now a lot of people see a scene like this and they ask me, in the end result, this moon, these two moons are going to stand out. They're going to be nice and light. And a lot of people, when they see this, if they don't see kind of the process by which you achieve that relative lightness, they don't know how you do it. A lot of times people think you've used some kind of resist or something like that, or you've stamped something out in white. But the image itself is a reversed image, or a reverse of that light area. So, when we go on to apply inks down here, for it to be remain light, it just means that you don't ink over that. Okay, these wands right here are kind of a nice applicator. Back before these types of things were out, a lot of people use cosmetic sponges to sponge colors onto their scenes, and we used all kinds of things. I saw Nerf balls being used, kind of a foam ball, but I like these ones. These are nice and ergonomic. I don't know, you can even, I was even wadding up paper towels back in the day before a lot of this type of stuff came out. Okay, now this ink too, in addition to being real light, it's really kind of a slick ink. It's real slippery, so that when I apply it down, I don't know, this ink is so light that I'm not even sure it's going to show up in this video right here, so I'll try to move into the darker tones. But this ink is really light, and it's a good ink to start off with, because even if I do a big, smash of that ink right on the page, it's super light, so it doesn't really show up that distinctly, but it's also kind of a real slippery ink, like I was saying, so it kind of coats the page really nicely, and before it absorbs into the page and becomes set, where you can't move it around, it kind of lays on the page nicely. It almost acts as a lubricant. And these Adirondack lights are put out by Ranger, which you know is, it's a real well-known company. Their whole range of inks seem to have that same type of consistency in the dye-based inks, at least. Not the alcohol-based ones, but in the dye-based ones. And I really like that as a first layer of tone. As I'm starting to sponge on color on this, I'm kind of directing light through the use of shadow. So I'm kind of adding this around here and there. If I want the moon to stand out brighter, then I have to take the area around it and make it a little bit darker, okay? I like to frame my scenes off, so I'm kind of putting this around on the perimeter. I don't always have to keep the card upright and work on it like this. You know, I always tell people to kind of spin the card around and, you know, keep it at an angle that's the most ergonomic for you and the most comfortable. All right? So you can kind of see what's going on here. I'm kind of toning in the areas around the moon. The moon is standing out a little bit brighter. When this whenever given color I'm working with at the time just won't get any darker because I've achieved a full saturation of it wherever I want it to go. I just simply move on to the next color. In this case, it's another blue. It's the next value of blue. You can see it's a little bit darker. And that additional base coat of that more slipperier, thicker type of ink gave me a nice foundation so that even if I do a really hard type of application of that, that really moves around for me. Let's see. Okay, let me show you what I'm getting at while I'm talking about this. Okay, this is the first color of ink. It's real slippery. Okay, it moves around nicely. All right. Now this ink right here is a little bit thinner. Okay, in terms of the consistency. So if I put that right there and I try to move it around, you can kind of still see it there a little bit. But if I put this same ink on this one now, that really moves around for me. So you can see what kind of lubricating the page. It looks like there was a little bit of black on that tip right there, but you know, anyways, I think you get the point to see the example. All right. So what I always tell people is get that good foundation coat, and all the other colors, all the other brands of inks that you use over that foundational coat will blend really smoothly and nicely. You don't have to worry about getting hard edges. A lot of people, when they're doing any type of sponging technique, what they tell me is, I'm getting edges or something like that. They tell me they're getting that type of thing, the shape of the sponge, okay? All right, now there's different ways you can do that. I can apply things in a little bit more of a lighter fashion like that, all right? But also, here's that little splotch of area that I put this thicker type of ink. But see, if I put that down there, you can still kind of move it around, right? But here's this other area of the page that I didn't put any of it down. And you can see it's set a little bit, you know, it's a little bit more fixed. It absorbed into the paper, okay? So how that looks on here is when I apply it down, it blends and it glides right across the page in a real smooth fashion. Don't try to rush it. Don't say, okay, that's not getting as dark as I want it to go. So they start scrubbing with these types of things, or they're sponges, you know. But that's not it. You just want to, you know, lightly layer it on there and apply a little bit of tone at a time. And everything will go on nice and smoothly, and it's not going to be a precarious type of application. You know, you're not making these bold, you know, strokes like, you know, like Asian calligraphy or something like that. You're just putting it down, and if you don't like it, spread it around a little bit more, okay? All right, now as I get darker and darker with these, you know, this selection of blue values, what I'm also doing here too is I might not take that color in as far as I did with the previous color, so that it looks like light emanating from within and kind of glowing out towards the edge of the card. So right now I'm on this kind of dark blue tone. All right, and you can see I'm using a real light touch, but even if I used a harder touch like that, you can see how, you know, what an edge that would give me. I can blend it out, and that's where the usage of the lighter tones really come in handy. Okay, and you can see I don't have to take things as dark as I'm taking them right now, but what I always tell people is the brighter you want the moon to seem, the darker you take the areas around it, and that way you have contrast. Here's some areas down here in the shadows of the lake, right next to the rocks. Maybe I'll deepen the shadows a little bit more with some of these darker tones like that. I feel it kind of anchors our objects down in our scenes a little bit more. It kind of gives weight to the objects. In this case, it's rocks. And I don't always have to use this in a dabbing motion like that. I can also use these tools to give a real thin line. And maybe I'll differentiate a little bit between sky and water. Why not give a little streak in the water? And you can see I'm kind of turning the card so it gives me a nice ergonomic streak as opposed to keeping it like this. I can't do this real easy. Alright. Okay, a little bit more shading around here. Okay, moving up. A little bit of even darker blue. And you can see I'm also not cleaning off this tip here. I'm just using the same tip if I'm moving up in the same, color family. If I wanted to use a yellow or something like that, or a light pink or something like that to add a little bit of a violet tone in here, naturally I'm going to change to a different tip. Okay, now we stamped out the main scene in black. I think I'm going to finish off this scene with a little bit of black around the edges, and I think that kind of finishes off a scene really nicely. A lot of times I like to finish my edges with the same color as the darkest objects within the scene. In this case, it happens to be a black Lakeside Cove Large, which is right here. That was stamped out black, so I'm finishing it up with black here, and I feel that it sets in the scene a little bit more by doing so. Okay. Sky and reflection. If we want to kind of change that, it looks really symmetrical right now. Here's another larger tree, and I was thinking, I thought I'd wait till I got to this point in the scene before I decided if I was going to use this or not, but I think I will. This is the spruce tree, and it kind of reiterates the shapes that are in the background there on that cove. At this point, too, if I'm stamping it, if I don't let this dry a little bit, I have to kind of hold this stamp down so that the ink transfers onto the page a little bit more than if I was stamping on a dry piece of paper right now. So you kind of hold it down to get a nice bold impression. Again, you've seen in those other videos, you don't have to use the full stamp. You can use a small section of it. In this case, I'm just using the tips. I don't want to use this whole thing because it would go, right up through my trees up there. Overlap, change the height. And what I was saying about holding this down a little bit longer, if I just went stamp and lift it up, it might give me a really light impression because some of that ink would be like it would act like a vacuum. Okay, so there you have it. Finishing off the scene with some different tones of ink, different values of blue. Probably worked through, I think it was 5 different values of blue. And in this case too, you can put some kind of little figures in there at this point in time. And what I also like to do is I like to put in some details on the rocks to create highlights and some additional lighting effects. But I'll do that in a separate video. Okay, so that's just a little basic lesson on layering with dye-based inks on glossy cardstock using the scene that we did in the previous video. Okay, thanks for watching.